The child was dreaming of water again. Nail could feel it even before she opened her eyes, the warm current pulling her down into the deep place, the place where all the voices lived. They rose in overlapping chords, hundreds of them, singing in a language she had never been taught but somehow understood. They said, "You are ours." They said, "Come home." They said, "You were never supposed to be alone." She woke gasping, her fingers white-knuckled around the edge of the cot, the thin blanket twisted between her legs. Above her, the ventilation grate hummed its low, constant note, and through the porthole-shaped window she could see the first gray light of pre-dawn settling over the port market of Tessiverin. Someone was already moving in the kitchen downstairs. She knew who it was before the smell reached her flatcakes on the griddle, the sharp green scent of bruised valenweed, something warm and grain-heavy that she had no galactic name for but that he called porridge. The man moved quietly for someone his size, but the building was old Tessivari stonework, and every footstep carried. The child sat up. She was small, even by the standards of her kind, the Salenthi, the ones the port officials called unregistered displaced minors when they were feeling bureaucratic and strays when they were not. Lavender skin, too pale in the mornings, darkening to violet when she'd been in the sun. Silver-white hair that she kept hacked short because nobody had ever shown her how to braid it properly. Pointed ears, longer than a human's thumb, that she pressed flat against her skull whenever she was listening hard. Eyes the color of wet amber, too large for her face, always watching. She pulled on the oversized maintenance jumpsuit that served as her only set of clothing, and climbed down the narrow staircase into the kitchen of the crossed anchor. Adem Vasic did not look up from the griddle. He was a broad man, late 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples and hands that looked like they'd been designed for pulling engine parts rather than flipping flatcakes. He wore a stained apron over a faded thermal shirt, and there was flour on his forearms and in the stubble along his jaw. He had the kind of face that settled into stillness the way stone does, not cold, but patient. He'd been a cargo ship's cook for 22 years before the freighter company went under, and he'd washed up in Tessiverin with his savings, his knives, and the permanent hunch of a man who'd spent 2 decades ducking through low corridors. He ran the crossed anchor now. It was not a restaurant. It was not an orphanage. It was not a shelter. It was, according to the signage, a provisions establishment and lodging house, which meant he cooked meals for dock workers and rented 3 rooms upstairs to whoever needed them. What it actually was, what everyone in the port market knew but nobody said aloud, was the place where the stray children ended up. "Eat," Adem said, sliding a plate onto the counter without turning around. Nail climbed onto the stool. The flat cake was still steaming. There was a cup of water beside it, and a small dish of the pickled root vegetables that Adem kept in jars along the back wall. She ate slowly, watching him work. He moved through the kitchen the way she imagined a ship's cook would, economy in every motion, nothing wasted, nothing theatrical. He cracked the next round of batter onto the griddle with one hand and reached for the valenweed with the other, and his expression never changed. There were 4 other children sleeping upstairs. Tessiverin's stray population shifted like tides. Children arrived, stayed for weeks or months, moved on, or were collected by whatever authority finally noticed them. But there were always some. Adem fed them. He gave them cots and blankets, and he fixed the plumbing when it broke, and he told them to wash their hands before meals. And he did all of this with the same unhurried, unsentimental steadiness that he brought to everything else. He did not tell them they were safe. He simply made them safe and let them figure it out. Nail had been at the crossed anchor for 11 months. She was the longest-staying child in the building's history, and she had never once called Adem by his name. She called him Cook. The Tessiverin port market opened at dawn, and by the time the first stalls were raising their canopies, the smell of Adem's kitchen had already pulled the morning crowd. Dock workers, freighter crews between hauls, a handful of Tessivari merchants who pretended they came for the location and not the food. Nail cleared tables and carried plates and kept her ears flat and her mouth shut, and she moved through the crowd like smoke present but ungraspable, always sliding out of reach before anyone could look at her too closely. She had learned this, not from Adem. He had never taught her to hide. She had learned it from the years before, the ones she did not talk about. 3 foster placements that had ended badly. A transit hold where she'd slept between shipping containers for 6 weeks. A processing center on Kelvith Station where an intake officer had looked at her file, looked at her, and said, "Another one," with the particular exhaustion of someone who had stopped seeing children as people a long time ago. The dreams had started after Kelvith. Always the same: warm water, many voices, the feeling of being pulled down into something vast and patient. She had mentioned them to no one. By mid-morning the market was full, and Nail was carrying a tray of empty cups back to the kitchen when she saw the woman. The woman was Tessavari, tall, angular, with the bronze-green skin and close-cropped dark hair common to the local species. She wore a long coat the color of charcoal and carried a data tablet in a leather case, and she stood at the edge of the market square watching the crossed anchor with the particular stillness of someone who had been watching for a long time. Nail's ears went flat. She slipped inside, set the tray down, and found Adem at the sink. "Someone's watching the building," she said. Adem did not look up. He rinsed a pot, set it on the rack, and said, "Tall, gray coat. You saw her. She's been there since dawn. Her name is Marin Dash. She's a registrar from the Tessavari Civic Authority. Don't worry about it." "What does she want?" Adem dried his hands on the apron. He looked at Nail for the first time that morning, a direct, level look that held no deception. "She wants to know why I have unregistered children living in a provisions establishment that isn't zoned for residential minors." Nail felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew what that meant. She had been through enough placements to understand the machinery, the inspections, the citations, the temporary relocations that were never temporary. The system did not have a category for what Adem did. It had categories for licensed foster homes and state-run processing centers and approved transit shelters, and the crossed anchor was none of those things, and the children who lived there existed in a gap that officials either ignored or, when they stopped ignoring it, closed. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Cook lunch," Adem said. "The dock shift changes at noon, and I'm already behind on the broth." Registrar Marin Dash entered the crossed anchor at 14:00 after the lunch crowd had thinned. She sat at the corner table, declined food, accepted water, and opened her tablet. Nail watched from the kitchen doorway. "Mr. Vasic," the registrar said, "you are currently housing 5 unregistered displaced minors in a commercial premises without a residential care license, a child welfare certification, or a registered guardian appointment for any of the children in question. Under the Tessavari Civic Code, Section 14, Subsection 3, this constitutes unauthorized custodial housing and is subject to immediate corrective action." Adem sat across from her. He had removed the apron but not the flour from his forearms. He looked at the registrar with the same patient stillness he brought to everything. "What does corrective action look like?" he asked. "The children will be transferred to the Tessavari Central Processing Facility for reassessment and placement through authorized channels." "Processing facility," Adem repeated. "That's the one on the Eastern Ring. Concrete building, no windows on the ground floor. I've seen it." The registrar's expression did not change. "It is a licensed facility." "How long does reassessment take?" "Average processing time is 14 to 20 weeks. "And during those weeks, where do they sleep?" "In the facility's residential wing." "The wing with the locked doors." A pause. The registrar looked down at her tablet, then back at Adem. "The facility operates under standard security protocol for the safety of the minors." Adem nodded slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward or cross his arms or do any of the things that Nail had seen angry adults do. He sat perfectly still and said, "The child you're looking at in the doorway, the Salenthi girl with the silver hair, she spent 4 months in a facility like that on Kelvith Station. When she came out, she didn't speak for 6 weeks. Not a word. Not to anyone. She ate with her hands covering the plate because she'd learned that if she didn't, someone would take the food. She slept under the cot, not on it, because the underside was the only place where nobody could reach her without her knowing." The registrar looked toward the doorway. Nail did not move. Her ears were pressed so flat against her skull that they were invisible. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," Adem said. "I'm telling you because if you take these children out of this kitchen and put them in a locked concrete building for 20 weeks, you will do more damage than I could undo in a year. And I'll still be here when they come out, and I'll still feed them, and we'll start over. So the question is whether 20 weeks of damage is worth the paperwork." The registrar closed her tablet. She looked at Adem for a long time. "The inspection will proceed," she said. "I'll schedule it for next week. If the premises meet basic safety standards for residential occupancy, I can file for a provisional exception under Section 14, Subsection 7(b) hardship waiver, informal care arrangement. It's not a license, but it would give you legal standing to continue while a formal application is processed." "How long does the formal application take?" "Months, sometimes longer." "That's fine," Adem said. "I'm not going anywhere." The dreams changed after that. Nail still sank into the warm place, still heard the voices. But now there were images fleeting, fractured, like light through cracked glass. She saw a city built of pale stone rising from a shallow sea. She saw figures moving through corridors of light, their skin the same lavender as hers, their ears the same shape, their eyes the same amber. She saw a woman know, a shape, a presence reaching toward her with both hands, and the presence was vast and old and ached with something Nail had no word for. She woke in the dark, her heart hammering, and she climbed out of the cot and went downstairs. Adem was at the kitchen table, reading something on a battered datapad. He looked up when she appeared. "Dream," he said. She nodded. He got up, heated water, made a cup of the grain drink that she liked, and set it in front of her. Then he sat back down and went back to his reading. He did not ask what the dream was about. He did not tell her it would be all right. He simply stayed in the room while she drank, and the warmth of the cup, and the sound of his breathing, and the low hum of the building settling around them were enough. This was the thing she could not explain to anyone, that Adem Vasek did not try to be her father. He did not try to replace whatever she had lost. He simply occupied the space beside her and made it steady, and steadiness, after years of nothing but motion, was the most radical thing anyone had ever given her. The inspection happened on a Tesavari third day. Registrar Dash arrived with a structural assessor and a child welfare liaison, and they spent 4 hours going through the crossed anchor room by room. Nail and the other children sat in the kitchen and ate flatcakes, and listened to the assessor's boots on the floor above them. The 4 other children were Thesson, a Dravari boy with gray skin and copper eyes who had been at the anchor for 3 months and who spoke only when spoken to; Liss and Kavra, twin Tesavari girls who had been abandoned by a freighter crew and who held hands constantly, even while sleeping; and Oren, a half-human boy with dark skin and ears that were round on one side and pointed on the other, who had arrived 2 weeks ago and who flinched every time someone raised their voice. Nail was the eldest. She had not chosen this role, but it had chosen her, and she wore it the way she wore the maintenance jumpsuit, awkwardly, without complaint, as though it were the only thing that fit. She sat with Oren while the inspection proceeded. The boy had pulled his knees to his chest and was watching the doorway with wide, fixed eyes. "It's not about us," she told him quietly. "It's about the building, whether the stairs are safe, whether there's enough water pressure, building things." Oren looked at her. He was young, small enough that his feet didn't reach the floor from the stool. What if they say the building's not safe? Then Cook will fix whatever they say needs fixing. What if they take us somewhere? Nail was quiet for a moment. She could feel her ears trying to flatten, and she forced them upright. Cook won't let that happen, she said, and the strange thing was she believed it. The inspection ended at dusk. The assessor filed her report. The welfare liaison spoke with each child individually, brief, formulaic interviews that Nail answered with the practiced blandness of someone who had done this many times before. When the liaison asked if she felt safe at the crossed anchor, she said yes. When the liaison asked if the adult in the building had ever harmed her or made her uncomfortable, she said no. When the liaison asked if she wanted to be placed in an approved facility, she said, "I want to stay here," and her voice cracked on the last word, and the liaison wrote something down and moved on. Registrar Dash stayed after the others left. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Adem clean the griddle. "The structural report will take 3 days," she said. "Assuming no critical failures, I can file the hardship waiver by end of week." "Thank you," Adem said. The registrar hesitated. Something shifted in her face, a crack in the professional surface. "Mr. Vasic, I want you to understand something. The waiver is not a guarantee. It gives you provisional standing, but any formal complaint, any incident involving the children, any change in your financial status that affects the premises, any of those can trigger a revocation hearing. And if the waiver is revoked, the corrective action I described becomes mandatory." "I understand. You're one man running a kitchen. You have no staff, no funding, no institutional support. You are not, by any standard metric, qualified to care for displaced minors." Adem set the scraper down. He turned to face her. "Registrar Dash, I've been feeding these children 3 meals a day for the better part of a year. I've kept the heat on, the water clean, and the doors open. I've sat with them when they couldn't sleep, and I've watched them learn to eat without guarding their plates. I'm not qualified. I'm just here." The registrar left without answering. 3 months passed. The hardship waiver was approved. Adem hung the certificate on the wall behind the counter, next to the provisions license and a faded photograph of a cargo freighter that Nail assumed was his old ship. The crossed anchor continued as it always had, meals at dawn and noon, children underfoot, dock workers filling the tables, the port market swirling around them like a living thing. Nail grew. Not much. Salenthi children grew slowly, but enough that the jumpsuit rode up at her ankles, and Adem, without comment, left a new one folded on her cot one morning. It was not new. It was market-used, soft from washing, and it fit properly, and she wore it for 3 days straight before she could bring herself to take it off. The dreams grew too. The city and the shallow sea became clearer streets of pale stone, bridges arcing between towers, the sound of water everywhere. The figures became faces. The presence that reached for her became a voice, and the voice said her name, not Nail, the name she had been given at the processing center on Kelvith, but another name, older, longer, in a language that vibrated in her chest like a struck bell. She told Adem about the dreams on a night when neither of them could sleep. "I think they're memories," she said, "but I don't remember any of it. I don't remember a city or a sea or any of those people." Adem poured the grain drink. "How old were you when you entered the system?" "They said I was very young, too young to have memories." "Maybe, or maybe you just have a different kind of memory." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I was a ship's cook for 22 years. I can't tell you the name of every port I docked at. But I can tell you what the galley smelled like at 400 when the ovens heated up, and I can tell you the exact sound the hull made when we dropped out of transit. Some things live in the body, not the head. Maybe your people are like that." Nail held the cup in both hands. The warmth spread through her palms, up her wrists, into the tight knot in her chest that never fully unwound. "Cook," she said. "Yeah." If they come from the dream, the people in the water, if they come and they want to take me back, what happens? Adem looked at her across the table. His face was still, as it always was, but there was something behind the stillness, not urgency, not fear, but a gravity that she recognized because she'd felt it in herself, in the moments when the dreams pulled hardest. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. "I don't know." "Then we'll figure that out when we get there." He said we, and the words settled into the silence like a stone dropped into still water. They came on a market day. Nail saw them before anyone else did. 3 figures moving through the port square with the particular fluidity of people who were used to being in water, their steps too smooth, their weight distributed differently, as though gravity were a suggestion they were merely entertaining. They were Salenthi. She knew this the way she knew the dream language, not from memory, but from somewhere deeper, older, cellular. 2 were tall, robed in fabrics that shifted color with the light pearl to silver to the pale green of shallow seas. The 3rd was shorter, older, with deep violet skin and hair like white frost, and she walked between the other 2 with the careful authority of someone who was used to being followed. They stopped in front of the crossed anchor. Adem was at the griddle. He looked up, looked through the open front window and set down the spatula. He wiped his hands. He said nothing. The older Salenthi entered first. She looked around the kitchen at the worn stone floor, the rack of clean pots, the jar of valenweed, the 5 stools at the counter, and her eyes found Nail, and something broke in her face. Not dramatically, not with sound. Just a quiet fracturing, like ice giving way under slow pressure. And the woman's amber eyes, the same amber as Nail's, filled with a light that was not tears but was close. "Nailith Savarine," the woman said, the name from the dream, the longer name, the older one. Nail's ears pressed flat. Her hands closed into fists at her sides. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. "My name is Nail," she said. The woman absorbed this. She looked at Adem, then back at the child. "I am Thessara Vane Savarine. I am the keeper of the Savarine line, and I have been searching for you for a very long time." Silence. The griddle hissed behind Adem's back. "The dreams," Nail said. "The water, the voices, that was you." "Not me alone, all of us. The resonance carries through the bloodline. It is how we find our lost ones, but the signal was faint. You were very far away and very young when you were taken, and the resonance had almost nothing to hold on to." Thessara's voice was steady, but her hands were not. They trembled at her sides, and she kept them carefully still against the fabric of her robe. "We did not stop looking. I want you to know that." Nail looked at Adem. He stood behind the counter, his big hands resting on the surface, his face patient and still. "What are you asking?" Nail said to Thessara. "I am asking you to come home." The word hit Nail like a physical thing. Home. She had heard it before in processing centers, in foster placements, in the mouths of officials who used it to mean the next place we put you. It had never meant what Thessara meant now, which was a city in a shallow sea, a bloodline, a name that vibrated in the chest. "I need to think," Nail said. Thessara nodded. "We will wait." The 3 Salenthi left the crossed anchor and stood in the market square, and the port went on around them as though they were stones in a river. That night, Nail sat on her cot and did not sleep. The other children were quiet. Thessan's breathing was slow and even. The twins murmured to each other in the dark, their private language of whispers, and held hands. Oren slept on his stomach with his arms wrapped around the pillow, a habit he'd developed, because it was harder for someone to pull a pillow away than a blanket. Nail looked at the ceiling. She thought about the city and the sea. She thought about Thessara's trembling hands. She thought about the resonance, a bloodline calling to its own, a signal that had crossed light years and years of silence and processing centers and transit holds and foster placements, and had found her anyway, in a kitchen in a port town, eating flatcakes made by a human who didn't even know her real name. She thought about Cook. Not about what he had done that was obvious and she did not need to catalog it. Fed her, sheltered her, stayed. She thought about what he was, which was harder to name. He was the space between the dream and the waking. He was the steady ground that she had learned to stand on when everything else was current and motion. He was not her father and not her family and not her guardian, and he was the most permanent thing in her life. And the thought of leaving him was like the thought of stepping off solid ground into water whose depth she did not know. She went downstairs. Adem was at the table. He had 2 cups already poured. He pushed one toward her without looking up. "I don't want to go," she said. "I know. But the dreams won't stop, and she came all this way. And there's a whole place, Cook, a city, people who look like me, a name I didn't even know I had." "I know." She sat down. She wrapped her hands around the cup. "What would you do?" Adem was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the building settled around them, and the port market outside went fully dark, and the only sound was the hum of the ventilation and the distant creaking of ships at the docks. "When I was 23, he said, "I took a berth on a cargo freighter because it was the only job I could find. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I stayed because the galley was mine and the crew needed to eat, and there was something in that, in being the person who made sure people were fed, that made sense to me. I stayed for 22 years, not because the ship was home, because the work was and the people I fed were, and I'd learned that home isn't a place. It's the thing you do that you can't stop doing, even when nobody asks you to." He looked at her. "You have people out there who share your blood and your name, and whatever it is that lets them find you across the dark. That matters. But you also have a cot upstairs and a jumpsuit that fits and 4 kids who watch you to figure out if this place is safe because you're the one who's been here the longest. That matters too." Nail's eyes burned. She pressed her ears flat and blinked hard. "Both things can be true," Adem said. "Going and staying can both be right, and whatever you choose, the kitchen will be here." She did not cry. She finished the drink, went upstairs and lay on the cot, and for the first time in months the dream did not come. She slept in the dark, in the silence, in the building that hummed around her like a living thing. In the morning she went to the market square. Thesara was waiting. The 2 attendants stood behind her, their robes catching the dawn light. The port market was just beginning to stir, canopies going up, voices calling, the smell of engine exhaust and salt, and something floral that the Tessavari vendors burned at their stalls. "I want to see it," Nail said. "The city, the sea, all of it. I want to know where I came from." Thesara's face opened like a door. "You will. But I'm coming back." A pause. The older woman studied her, not with disappointment, not with confusion, but with the careful attention of someone reassessing a situation they had planned for differently. "The crossed anchor," Thesara said, "the human." "He's not my family," Nail said. I don't have a word for what he is, but I'm coming back to him." Thesara looked past Nail, toward the kitchen window. Adem was visible behind the counter, moving through the morning routine, cracking batter onto the griddle, not watching. "The Salenthi do not keep children from those who sheltered them," Thesara said. "It is the oldest law we have. If someone gives a child water when they are thirsty, that person's threshold is sacred." She paused. "I will bring you back. You have my word." Nail nodded. She turned and walked back into the crossed anchor. Adem was plating flatcakes. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment, his broad back, the flour on his arms, the steady rhythm of his hands. "I'm going with them," she said, "but I'm coming back." He did not turn around. He finished plating, set the spatula down, and then he turned. His face was the same as it always was, still, patient, unhurried. But his eyes were bright, and he blinked once hard, in a way that she had never seen him do before. "All right," he said. "Cook." "Yeah." "Keep my cot." Something moved in his jaw. He nodded once. She left the kitchen. She crossed the market square. She fell into step beside Thessara Vane Savarine, and the three Salenthi closed around her like water closing over a dropped stone, and they moved together through the port town toward the docks, and the dawn light caught their robes and their skin and the silver of Nail's hair, and behind them the crossed anchor stood quiet and solid in the morning, its kitchen window open, the smell of flat cakes carrying into the street. The city was everything the dreams had promised and more. It rose from a shallow inland sea on a world called Valenthar, pale towers connected by bridges of living coral, streets that followed the waterline, buildings that breathed with the tide. The Salenthi moved through it the way fish move through a reef, and Nail watched them and felt the resonance pulling at her from every direction, hundreds of voices, thousands, the bloodline singing in her bones. Thessara showed her the Savarine estate, a compound of pale stone overlooking the central channel, with open courtyards that filled with shallow water at high tide and drained at low. There were children there, Salenthi children, lavender and violet and silver, with amber eyes and pointed ears and the quick, fluid movements of a species that had evolved in water and carried the current in their bodies. They looked at Nail with curiosity, and she looked back at them, and for the first time in her life she saw her own face reflected in someone else's. She stayed for 40 days. She learned that she had been taken during a raid. A faction called the Vichari Orthodoxy had targeted Savarine settlements during a territorial dispute, and the youngest children had been seized as political leverage. Most had been recovered. Nail had been among the few who were not sold into the displacement stream, processed, reprocessed, scattered across systems like seeds on the wind. The orthodoxy had been dissolved years ago, but the lost children remained lost, and the resonance signal, the Salenthi bloodline's equivalent of a beacon, had been the only thread connecting them to home. She learned that Nailith Savarine meant the voice that returns from silence, and that it had been given to her at birth by a mother who had died during the raid, and whose face Nail carried in the shape of her own eyes. She learned to swim. She did not learn to stay. On the 40th day, she stood in Thessara's courtyard and watched the tide come in and fill the stones around her feet, and she said, "I need to go back." Thessara looked at her for a long time. The older woman's violet face was lit by the reflected light from the water, and her expression held something that Nail recognized from the inside, the particular ache of loving someone you cannot keep. "He is human," Thessara said, not as a question. "Yes. He is not Salenthi. He does not carry the resonance. He cannot hear you in the way that we hear you." "I know. And yet. Thessara closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were clear. The oldest law says, if someone gives a child water when they are thirsty, their threshold is sacred. The crossed anchor is your threshold. I cannot argue with the law." "You don't have to argue with it," Nail said. "You just have to let me go. I am not holding you. I know, that's why I'll come back." Thessara stepped forward. She placed both hands on Nail's shoulders, the first time she had touched the child since arriving in Tessavarin, and the resonance surged through the contact, a wave of warmth and recognition that ran from Thessara's palms into Nail's bones and back again, and in that moment, Nail understood what unconditional meant. It did not mean without pain. It meant the pain could not change the answer. "Come back," Thessara said. "I will." She returned to Tessavarin on a market day. The port was busy, the stalls full, the morning light cutting sharp angles through the canopies. She walked through the square in the Salenthi traveling clothes that Thessara had given her, woven fabric that shifted from pearl to silver, fitted properly, nothing like a maintenance jumpsuit, and she carried a small bag over one shoulder, and in the bag was a carved stone from Valenthar's central channel, smooth and heavy, the same pale color as the city's towers. The crossed anchor was open. She could smell the griddle from the square. She stopped in the doorway. Adem was behind the counter. There was flour on his arms, and in his stubble, and his apron was stained, and the griddle was hissing, and the 5 stools at the counter were occupied: Thesson, Lys, Kavra, Oren, and a new child she didn't recognize. A small Tesavari boy with wide green eyes who was eating a flat cake with the focused intensity of someone who was not yet sure the food would stay. Adem looked up. He looked at her. His face did not change, still, patient, unhurried, but he reached below the counter and produced a plate, and he set it on the 6th stool, the one at the end that had been empty for 40 days, and the flat cake was already on it, still steaming, as though he had made it that morning and every morning since she'd left, and he had been waiting. Nail sat down. She set the carved stone on the counter beside her plate. "What's that?" Adem said. "It's from Valenthar, the city in the sea, my city." He picked it up, turned it over in his big hands, and set it back down on the counter. "Nice stone." "Cook." "Yeah. My name is Nalith Savarine. It means the voice that returns from silence." He looked at her for a moment. Then his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one that she had ever seen on his face. "Welcome back, Nail," he said. She ate the flat cake. It tasted exactly the same. Years passed. Nail grew. She grew into the longer name and into the knowledge of where she came from and into the body that had always been hers, but that she had never fully understood. She returned to Valenthar twice more, once for a season, once for a full cycle, and each time she learned more of the water and the resonance and the bloodline that sang in her bones. And each time she came back to Tesavarine, to the port market, to the crossed anchor, to the smell of flat cakes and the hum of the building, and the man who had never asked her to stay and had never stopped keeping her place. She was not the only one who came back. Thesson came back after a year in a Dravari settlement, quieter than before, and he took over the morning dishes without being asked. Oren came back after his father was found and lost again, and Adem gave him the cot by the window and a new blanket and did not ask a single question. The twins came back after a foster placement that they never talked about, and they held hands at the counter and ate flat cakes, and the kitchen absorbed them the way it absorbed everything, without judgment, without ceremony, with the steady patience of a place that had decided to endure. Registrar Dash came back too, not as an inspector. She came for lunch on 3rd days, and she sat at the corner table, and she ate whatever Adem put in front of her, and once Nail overheard her say to a colleague on her comlink, "The Vassic case is non-standard, but the outcomes are well. The outcomes speak for themselves." Adem's hair went fully gray. His hand stayed steady. The griddle continued to hiss at dawn. On a morning near the end of Nail's 3rd year at the anchor, her last year, before she would age out of the displacement system entirely, she came downstairs to find Adem sitting at the kitchen table with his hands folded, and a look on his face that she had never seen before. "What?" she said. "The Tesavari Civic Authority offered me a formal guardian license," he said. "Full accreditation, funded, staff support, proper residential zoning." Nail stared at him. "You're joking." "I don't joke, you know that." "Cook, that changes everything. That means you don't have to worry about the waiver. That means the children have legal standing. That means—" "I know what it means." She sat down. She looked at him across the table, at the gray hair, and the flour-dusted arms, and the face that had been her North Star for years, the immovable point around which her whole life had reorganized itself. "You deserve this," she said. "I don't need deserving. I need a bigger kitchen." She laughed. It came out of her like a cough, startled and raw, and Adem's mouth moved into that almost smile, and the morning light came through the window and caught the carved stone on the counter, and the photograph of the old freighter on the wall, and the 5 stools at the counter, and the 6th stool at the end, the one that was always hers. "Cook," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for keeping the plate warm." He looked at her. The brightness was in his eyes again, and this time he did not blink it away. "That's the job," he said. Outside, the port market was opening. Canopies went up. Voices called. The smell of flatcakes carried through the open window into the morning air of Tessavarin, where the dock workers were arriving and the children were waking and the building was humming its low, constant note, and the current pulled and the resonance sang, and the kitchen endured.